Ever just be casually playing the game and then boom, out of nowhere, a wild weapon buff appears and transforms a mega gun into a god? Well, today we'll be experiencing that emotion together as I take you through a journey of the most mind-blowing buffs that changed the game. Prepare yourself, these have to be seen to be believed. This story begins on the 27th of February, where before this day, the Lob was just a scrawny kid on the playground. Think SpongeBob without his muscle suit. It couldn't even tickle a fly, this thing literally did no damage. It was comfortably the worst gun in the game, but then it went to the all-you-could-eat buffet and ate until it couldn't eat anymore. It received a whopping 900% increase to its damage. They greatly increased its damage per tick, made it fire in a 3-round burst instead of semi-auto, and tripled its mag size. It went from being the worst gun in the game to the best overnight. It was simply insane. Nowadays, if you're thinking about running the Lob, it's back to semi-automatic, but still has that great damage intact. The Lob really shook the foundations for what it meant to be buffed, and that continued throughout the game's lifecycle. On the 5th of March 2020, 3 guns would be bestowed the blessing of the buff. One of them was the Krakatoa, which started off as an incredibly mediocre sniper rifle, but became the best sniper rifle in the game for an instance. It received a 500% increase to its damage and took the sniper rifle throne from the Leuda. After the buff, it could melt through flesh health bars faster than anything we'd ever seen before. Get him angry and he's bound to erupt. The Hellshock was also a weapon to receive a monster buff on this day. Not quite at the meme status pre-buff that the Krakatoa was, but certainly in need of some love. The Krakatoa's buff gave us a boss dropping beast, but we needed something to shred through hordes of mobs, and that's exactly what we got. The Hellshock had its damage increased by over 250% and gained an extra projectile. Add those two together and you've got a huge increase in damage. That extra projectile didn't cost anything too, it was purely positive, and the Hellshock became a must-have in all builds for many months to come. The Sickle also received a buff on this day, but we would have to wait another week on the 12th of March for it to be truly realised. That's because the unique Boom variant, which fires explosive rounds, didn't receive that bonus, and when it did, things got crazy. Its damage increased by almost 200% and turned it into one of the most damaging weapons in the game. To have a fully automatic explosive shotgun that takes assault rifle ammo is one thing, but when it does this much damage, that's another. It wasn't just weapons that received buffs that changed the game, but on the 25th of June, it was action skills too. Up until this point, the Digi-Clone really struggled. It was merely a mimic, and not the good kind like in Elden Ring. This thing wouldn't help you to become Elden Lord, if anything Elden Loser, but that all changed when it received Mayhem Scaling. Mayhem Scaling is just a term that means a whole lot of damage. It became capable of dropping bosses all on its own, and was completely unrecognizable from the Digi-Clone of before. It wasn't just the Digi-Clone, but Iron Bear too. This massive mechanized monster couldn't do anything prior to the buff except for sponge bullets. That's all it was, basically a big target for your enemies and a cold metal prison for most. That was a thing of the past when they changed it from running on diesel to this thing called Mayhem Scaling, which transformed it into the most broken action skill in the game. It became its very own raid boss with an arsenal of weapons that would put Torg to shame. Iron Bear's capabilities were finally unlocked, and it now packs a mighty punch. We would have to wait a little while for the next major buff, but this one changed everything and became many players' favourite weapon from this point on. The Hellwalker before this day didn't have anything going for it, other than being a sawn-off shotgun that fires flaming rounds in the shape of a pentagram and makes heavy metal music whenever you pick it up or shoot it. That's pretty cool, but as my grandma always says, cool doesn't kill. She never said that. When it received that 370% increase to its damage, it finally had the whole package, able to blaze through enemies and bosses in style. From this day on, it would hold the mantle as the best shotgun in the game and never let it go. A month later, on October 15th, we would also see a monster buff, this time for the Redline, which funnily enough also drops from the same enemy as the Hellwalker. Must have been something that guy had for breakfast. The Redline pre-buff was simply unique, that's all. It didn't have any damage going for it, but when it got its monster 200% damage buff and a reduction in recoil, although only 5%, this gun turned into a boss dropping behemoth. The thing about this gun is that the more you stick, the more you stack in damage, and it was that boost to the sticky stacky handsome Jackie that enabled it to become one of the best boss dropping weapons in the game. Another month went by and another weapon became blessed by Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This time it was the Embers Purge, a unique SMG belonging to the Handsome Jackpot DLC, and also one of my favourite weapons, although it wasn't before this day. The buff didn't do anything to the weapon card, instead focusing on its unique effect by increasing the damage dealt by the pool of lava it spawns. The manufacturer must have done a deal with Torg's hot sauce company because that lava turned from lukewarm to spicy hot. Before the buff, enemies could stand in it and feel like maybe they had socks on, but afterwards it would fry them feet first, and definitely made it worthwhile completing Ember's crew challenges in that first DLC. 2 weeks into the new year, on the 14th of January 2021, the SF Force contracted buffitis, an inflammation of damage. Pre-buff, this gun was absolutely horrendous, a laser weapon that felt like you were squirting them with water. Dr. Evil would have had a fit. However, that fit would turn into a fat smile when its weapon damage increased by 700%. The interesting thing about this one, and why I think this weapon flies under most people's radars, is that the secondary element didn't receive a buff at all. It's essentially a melee one weapon with one functioning element, but I guess at the very least it's a walking before and after. The SF Force was only a warm-up to the day 3 weeks later on the 11th of February 2021, when the community was blindsided by two outrageous buffs. The first one we'll talk about is the Hail, which pre-buff struggled to keep up with other guns. I mean, it's not a legendary, so you wouldn't expect it, and its firing pattern made it difficult. However, when its damage increased by 400% and its lifesteal from 3 to 10%, it became legendary. The lifesteal did a massive job at keeping you alive, and its arcing bullets were no longer a burden, as that 150% critical damage increase combined with its weapon buff made it worthwhile to deal with. However, it doesn't compare at all really to the other weapon that was buffed on that day, which also belongs in Moxie's pantry, and that was the crit. Pre-buff, the crit was merely a reference to the gun in Borderlands 2, much like the Hail, but afterwards became one of the top 3 most overpowered weapons in the game. It received a whopping 540% increase to its damage, and its lifesteal was raised from 5 to 8%. They also lowered the chance that it could drop from your hand on reload from 12.5 to 5%. Nowadays, this thing will transform you into a walking delete key. You're the immovable object and the unstoppable force. The buffs on this day were absolutely ridiculous and made players around the world flock to Moxie's bar. That part didn't change much for me though, I already go there often. If you think those buffs were crazy, well, you're right, they were, but they were needed, unlike one buff on the 10th of June 2021. From when it released to this fateful day, the Unkempt Harold was rocking around as a pretty formidable weapon. It wasn't quite at the heights of necessity like it was in Borderlands 2, and maybe that inspired it to hit the gym, where it received a completely unnecessary 200% damage buff. It was like it was jealous of the other guns getting attention and needed some. It is by far the most uncalled for buff on this list. Pre-buff, it could blast through hordes of enemies and bosses, but after the buff it could one-shot them. A pistol that can one-shot a boss, that's a lot of power. And if you ask me, this buff did not make my day. However, another one did, another one that went live on the same day. And that was poor old Rowan. Before a swig of the buff juice, Rowan was rowing his boat gently down the stream. So gently in fact that he found himself amongst the 10 worst weapons in the game. Whether he attached a motor to his boat or just wanted to make me look bad, Rowan received a 300% damage increase, which took him amongst the 10 worst weapons in the game to the 10 best. Guy went from being homeless to becoming the CEO of Amazon with hair. If you're lucky enough to pick it up nowadays, this thing absolutely melts. It's an elemental Jacob's weapon that returns bullets to your magazine on critical hits. How can it not?